Hello and welcome to the Chiefs Briefing, where there are conversations with employees on the front lines of justice, public safety, and community impact. I'm Chief Jason Cusick, and today we're joined by someone whose job is crucial to solving crimes, but also goes unnoticed, the police evidence technician. From securing crime scenes to ensuring evidence stays intact for court, their role is vital in the pursuit of justice. And today I'm very happy to have Sam Niemeyer, an experienced evidence technician with the Lewiston Police Department. And thanks for joining us today, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
All right, to start, can you tell us a bit about your background?
Yes, so I have dispatched at the Lewiston Police Department for 10 years. And then after that, I spent about a year and a half over at the Nez Perce County Prosecutor's Office as a legal assistant and then a victim advocate specifically for victims of domestic violence. When the evidence technician job came open about 4 years ago, though, I was very excited to come back home to my LPD family.
Well, good. We're very happy to have you back. So mentioning that, let's just start with the basics. Can you tell our listeners exactly what a police evidence technician does?
It very much depends on the day. So oftentimes whatever's been booked into the evidence lockers overnight will determine the trajectory of my day. Any sort of evidence, found property, safekeeping, any item that an officer or a detective seizes and books in comes to me. And then it's my job to sort out from there what needs to be done with it. Do I need to return that found wallet to an owner? Do I need to get biological evidence to the lab for testing? Process an item that was left at a crime scene for fingerprints? It's hard to say. It's like any job, sometimes it's tedious, sometimes it's exciting. Sometimes I spend my days looking up case law, and then the next day I might get to work with the FBI's evidence response team. You never know.
Well, that sounds like a very huge responsibility. So how did you get in this line of work? And was it something you knew you wanted to do, or was it accidental?
I come from a law enforcement family. My dad was a cop. My mom was a dispatcher. So I pretty much always knew that something in criminal justice would be where I wanted to spend my career. I'd had my eye on this particular job for a long time, though. It always just looked so interesting and so much fun. So when it came open, I jumped on that chance.
All right. So, then let's talk about the process. So say when you're called to a crime scene, what's the first thing you would do?
So I only get called out to the large scenes, the homicides, the shootings, and only as needed. So if I'm there, it's big enough that most or all of the detectives are going to be there too. I'll just check with them and I kind of plug in where they need me. I might be assisting in the search. I might be helping mark and collect evidence. Sometimes I help with suspect or victim pets that are still on scene, wrangling dogs. Basically, whatever is needed. I mean, I've dug in the dirt for bones in the middle of July, and I've stood in the rain at 2 a.m. waiting to collect a firearm from a parking lot.
Wow, very diverse. So when you're on a crime scene, then could you walk us through, say, an example of how you would process any piece of physical evidence, say, for example, a weapon, since obviously you really go to just the bigger scenes.
Once we've photographed an item, sketched it, documented exactly where it is as it is on the scene, that's when we're going to actually pick it up and collect it as evidence. At that point, I mean, it may need to dry before we can package it. It might need a day or two to do that. And then we kind of transition our thought process. What kind of answers are we hoping to find from this piece? Is it DNA, fingerprints, blood spatter? We may need to send it to the Idaho State Police Forensics Lab for further, more in-depth testing. I may need to just hold on to it while the investigation progresses and we kind of get more information. But during all of this, obviously that all-important chain of custody is what has to be maintained. I need to be able to confidently and truthfully testify to the integrity of that evidence if or when that case goes to trial.
Well, and perfect transition. That was going to be the next question I had for you. So when it comes to chain of custody, can you kind of explain to listeners exactly what that term chain of custody means, but also how do you ensure that the evidence stays protected all the way through till trial?
So the chain of custody, it's really that vital thread. It runs all the way from when an item is deemed to be evidentiary until when the case is over and done. If that's compromised, that piece of evidence, it might not be usable, and that can throw your entire case into jeopardy, especially if that's a key piece of evidence. I need to be able to truthfully say I can account for where that piece of evidence was the entire time, and I need to have documentation and justification anytime that any person would have access to it. So we have a multitude of alarms, cameras, locks, backup systems. We have my type A personality triple checking that I've locked the doors and checked the alarms. But it's just a lot of making sure I can tell you exactly where that piece of evidence was at every point of the court case.
So to stay on that point a little bit, if a detective or if even a prosecutor or even a defense attorney needs to look at a piece of evidence, then what you're saying is that there's a checks and balance process where does it get signed in and signed out, or can it even leave the vault and they have to watch it or look at it under your direct supervision?
Absolutely. So if it needs to be looked at, oftentimes it just stays in the evidence room and I will be with the detective or the prosecutor, whoever needs to see it. If they need to do further investigation on it, like for instance, if a phone needs analyzed, then they will check it out from me and then have to check it back out when they're done. So lots of checks and balances.
Okay. Excuse me. So talking about the vault, can you explain kind of what your responsibilities managing the vault are? And are you the only one that manages the vault?
Yep, it's just me. It's a one-woman show. There are literally thousands of items in my evidence room. And kind of a common misconception is that they just kind of sit there indefinitely, sort of forgotten. They're just down there, and that's decidedly not true. The evidence room, it's a living, breathing organism for sure. Every single one of those items needs to either go somewhere, it needs analyzed, it's got some sort of a purpose to it. So keeping track of what needs done, what's happening with a certain case, what the prosecutors or the detectives are working on, that all plays into what I do, and it keeps me hopping. And then some of the stuff I get, it's like, quite honestly, it's just plain weird. I'll get brass knuckles, empty pop cans, rocks, passports. I've gotten pipe bomb parts, a couple machetes, dirt, and then, drugs, guns, all the regular stuff. But we actually have an evidence tech group in our region. So most of North Central Idaho and Eastern Washington participates. And we meet every few months just to bounce ideas off of each other. What's working, what's not, how do you store this, what do you do with this? And that's really helpful.
And that group's got together, and that's, I assume, how you guys at least have a sense of growth and development, because it's not like you just kind of show up and go, hey, I know how to do this now, right?
That is very true. There's not another job that's really quite like this. So if you have questions, there's not very many people to ask. A lot of it is some good common sense. And then, let's talk to other people who also do this job. So we're a pretty tight group. I'm very grateful for them.
All right. And then, so obviously I imagine this job comes with a fair share of challenges. What do you believe are the hardest parts of being an evidence technician?
I would say there's probably two things. The first is I spend my days with the physical, tangible reminders of the worst days of people's lives. And kind of along those lines, I also am the one who will return items to victims of a crime or family members of victims. And sometimes that wedding ring or that note or that piece of clothing, it's the last physical thing that links them to their loved ones. I mean, it might also be the exact piece of evidence we need for our criminal case, but it's also got a huge sentimental value. And so kind of balancing those two, it's a challenge, absolutely. It's a very heavy responsibility, but I also consider it a pretty great honor to safeguard those items until the proper time that they can be returned.
And that's a very fair and good point you make, because I think most people have a perception, even throughout a lot of time in my career, I realize evidence technicians, you just kind of think they're the person in the vault that processes, but you don't really realize there is an emotional component to the position. So I appreciate those comments, because I don't think most listeners understand the human side of the position as well. So have you ever been involved in a case where the evidence you handled was the biggest key to solving the crime?
Yes, there's one attempted murder case in particular that comes to mind. It involved a high lift jack. And we literally had dozens of items that were analyzed by the lab. So there was a lot of back and forth with those, but that high lift jack was absolutely instrumental in the case. I will say, though, a solid case, it's made up of many parts. You're going to have your investigation, you're going to have your interviews, the evidence will play a part of it, but it's all puzzle pieces, right? So the detectives and the prosecutors that I work with, they're pretty incredible. And I love watching them work, and I love that I get my little piece of the puzzle that I get to put together as well.
Well, and speaking of prosecutors, so have you testified in court? And if so, have you, what's been your experience and what kind of questions were you asked?
Yes, I have gotten to testify. It's certainly not the funnest way to spend a day, but it is part of the job. The questions I'm asked, they're mainly about the chain of custody and whether I kept the integrity of that piece of evidence intact and how exactly I did do that. I've also testified just to clarify about procedures that we use to have items tested. So specifically for like drug possession cases, what does that look like? Thankfully, I don't have to testify very often, but it does certainly happen.
And it's not quite the way you see it on TV either. Yeah, it's a very
Not at
stressful
all.
process, and there's a lot of preparation that goes in behind testifying because, every piece, like you said, everything, it's a puzzle piece, and they all have to fit. The mosaic has to come together, and if one person's not prepared, it'll impact it greatly. So I've never ever been relaxed on the stand testifying ever. So it's very uncomfortable. So how about technology? It's changing the way law enforcement works across the spectrum. And I'm sure obviously it's impacting evidence collection as well. So can you tell us how technology has affected your role?
So I actually found some of our old evidence ledgers a while back, and I looked at what had been booked into evidence on the day that I was born. And just looking at, we're talking all handwritten in an old dusty ledger, and it was very generic. It was just methamphetamine. And now the amount of detail and the amount of tracking, every item is barcoded. I can tell you exactly where it's been, how long it's been there, down to the second when it was scanned back into the room. That just kind of floors me. But the other one that I've really noticed is the advance in DNA analysis. Like, it's incredible. When you see on the news, there are so many cold cases that are being solved with DNA evidence and now genetic genealogy. I can see that the amount of evidence that we are now collecting with an eye towards DNA analysis is far more even than when I just started 4 years ago. And I think that's only going to continue to increase. So I'm actually very excited to see what progress we can make with our cold cases and just what we can get with these DNA evidence pieces that were just not a thing even 10 years ago.
Correct. And DNA is a very fascinating aspect that's really solving a lot of cases. With that, within the vault, does DNA have to be stored in a very special way or refrigerated or frozen or,
Yes, it depends on what type of, is it on clothing? Is it on bedding? Is it in like a sexual assault examination kit? That will determine it. But DNA, it has to breathe. So you can't put it in plastic. It's got to be stored in paper bags. It needs to be stored in a certain temperature range just to help it not die, for lack of a better word. But then again, they're finding DNA at archaeological sites, which have just been left out for thousands of years too. So I think DNA, it's a pretty tough, pretty hardy little thing. But yes, we absolutely have some very strict procedures that we have to follow. They're all stored in a separate area. I think that even as we learn more about it, we'll probably, I would say, make that even more precise so that we can keep that for even longer if we need to.
All right. And with all these advances going forward, do you think there's any new challenges on the horizon for evidence technicians?
I think, as always, that art of juggling what is in the evidence room, what you need for cases, what needs to be done with it. We are collecting more evidence than we ever have before, especially once again when it comes to DNA. So far, just this year, we're only in July, and we're well over 1,000 items that have been booked into LPD's evidence room. And we're going strong. So I think just seeing that increase and managing that well will continue to be a challenge. And then also just storing biological evidence long-term and maintaining the viability of that DNA. When you get into, unsolved homicides or sexual assault cases that don't have statutes of limitations, we need to be able to keep those for decades, and we need to be able to keep it well.
All right. So before we wrap up, what advice would you give someone interested in pursuing a career as, say, an evidence technician?
So just like most law enforcement jobs, you have to be able to set aside your feelings and your emotions, and you need to be able to do the job that you need to do. So if you can cultivate the ability to control those emotions and then also later circle back around and take care of yourself and process that properly, I think that would serve you well in this position any law enforcement position, and honestly, just in life in general. So I may have to deal with some pretty yucky or some pretty gruesome stuff. But then at the end of the day, I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to go home to my family, and I'm going to remember there is still a lot more good in this world than there is bad. And I need to remember that. So kind of cultivating that mindset, I think, would be very helpful if you wanted to go into this job.
Well, those are wonderful words, and I agree with everything you just said. So, well, thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights with us today. The work you do is truly incredible, and I selflessly can attest to that. But it's also clear how vital your role is in the pursuit of justice. So, and that's it for today's episode of the Chief's Briefing. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Sam and learning more about the important work of a police evidence technician. And until next time, Lewiston, stay safe and stay informed.